Namaste all, and welcome to our continuing series on the synthesis of yoga with our beloved Ranga. Today we are beginning Chapter 2, The 3 Steps of Nature.
So I see some new faces. So very briefly, I'll tell you what he is saying in the first chapter, and then we go on to the second chapter. So there in the first chapter, he is first giving you 2 principles in nature. One is he's taken up only 2 of the vibrations. There are 5 basic vibrations: contraction, expansion, coming down, going up. These are all a simple movement. These 5 vibrations determine all the forms in the physical world. But here he is discussing only 2. There is a contraction and an expansion. When there is a contraction, then there is a unification that takes place. And there is also an expansion and a dilution and a breaking up into many units. So these are the 2 things he discusses.
This is the fifth one, Ranganath. It's a contraction, expansion, going up, going down. And which is the fifth one?
Fifth one is simply gamanam, just going. Plain, simple movement of going. So, examples of contraction is condensation, and expansion is, the best example is the universe, which is expanded to infinite size. Then the going down is, a good example is gravitation. It pulls you down all the time, stabilizes you. And the other is going up. Going up is, liberation is another good example for the consciousness going up. Or nowadays, physically, if you want, the aeroplane, which is capable of going up. So these 5 motions, here he is discussing only 2 and applying these 2 principles to yoga. So this is what he does there. Then he says, whatever is happening in nature, we will follow that, because nature, there is an underlying wisdom, and what nature is doing, we will try and follow in her footsteps. That's why the next chapter also is the 3 steps of nature. Okay, that's the next chapter we're going to read. Then he comes to at the end he says, very briefly I'm telling you, and in the end he says that we need not compartmentalize worldly life and spiritual life. They run into each other, and there is no reason for us to compartmentalize them as India has done for thousands of years. If you want a spiritual life, you have to get away from the physical world. Too much of imperfection, too much perversity, too much of darkness, too much of density. You will never get the divine here. Go up is easier. There are examples which say that you can, in the physical world also, you can live a spiritual life. There are a few examples in our Indian scriptures. Gita is the best example. You remain in the physical world like a lotus leaf in water. The lotus leaf never gets wet. You are in the physical world, but you are not touched by these imperfections. The other is the one small line in the Isha Upanishad, which says that you do karma, but it need not necessarily give you attachment, ego and desire. Na karma lipyate nare. So these 2 things he takes up and says, we will end the chapter with, all life is yoga. Okay? There is an individual yoga, but there is also a universal yoga. Even nature is doing a yoga. That nature is doing the yoga, we are going to read now about it. Very briefly, I have summed up the first chapter.
Well, I said thousands of years this has been this tendency in India. Is it possible to narrow down when it started or get a close idea? Very difficult.
But most probably you can. Buddhism was certainly one of the biggest influences. Buddhism was certainly one of the biggest influences.
That is like 2,500 years ago.
Yeah, 600 BC.
600 BC.
And the last nail in the coffin of spiritual life in the world was Shankara. Okay? 8th century AD, who brought in the idea of Maya. But he has been misinterpreted because he is not a Mayavadin. But he has been misinterpreted. Okay? When you go into the higher levels of consciousness, words don't express things to you anymore. Words become very, very fixed forms and they distort the truth. So his meaning has been distorted. He doesn't believe that the world is anti-divine. He accepts the Sarvam Khalu Idam Brahman. He accepts that. So Shankara has been much vilified also as a Mayavadi.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. But he too subscribes to the view, if you want the divine permanently, you have to go up there, not here. Okay? We now go to the next.
Has anyone else, other than perhaps the Vedic rishis, said here?
Oh yes, Vedic rishis, there was no differentiation, no dichotomy between spiritual life and worldly life. In fact, that is something very well known now. We are discovering more and more. 64 areas of discipline, 64 shastras for everything, to such an extent that dance, music, grammar, language, politics, economics. Chanakya and what is the other one for economics? What's his name?
I don't know.
I forget the name. But all these sciences have been completely explored to the extent that even what is the psychology of a thief, how to steal, how it is with what mentality you should do so it's not caught. Okay. So everything has been explored. No running away from the physical world at all. So it all sums up with heaven is my father, the mother is my mother.
Earth is my mother.
Yeah.
Earth is my mother.
Earth is the mother.
Regarding Narad, what you were asking, so what you said is the Vedas, right? But even in the Upanishads, so the Isha Upanishad volume, Sri Aurobindo says that the Upanishads themselves can be categorized into two. One, those which were having this spiritual pragmatism of the Vedas, and the Isha, the Taittiriya, the Chandogya, Aitareya, and one more, Brihadaranyaka, they belong to that. And the later ones, they are having this world negation tendency.
Yeah.
So even some of the earlier Upanishads, they were having that. So not just the Vedic period, even the Upanishadic up till a certain point.
So, the Vedic period, yes, there was no differentiation between spiritual life and worldly life. They even had hints of the supermind. But the concept of evolution 5,000, 10,000 years ago and the divinization of the earth was maybe hinted at, but never really followed like Sri Aurobindo has done. He is the first one to do that. We will, what nature is doing in evolution, we will do it at an individual level so that it becomes at a universal level.
And accelerated.
Yeah. Okay, so now we go to the next chapter. The 3 steps of nature. We recognize then in the past developments of yoga a specializing and separative tendency which, like all things in nature, had its justifying and even imperative utility, and we seek a synthesis of the specialized aims and methods which have, in consequence, come into being. I'll read the whole para first. Sri Aurobindo's language is extremely condensed and terse. We'll read the whole para and come back to it. But in order that we may be wisely guided in our effort, we must know first the general principle and purpose underlying this separative impulse, and next the particular utilities upon which the method of each school of yoga is founded. For the general principle, we must interrogate the universal workings of nature herself, recognizing in her no merely specious and elusive activity of a distorting Maya, but the cosmic energy and working of God Himself in His universal being, formulating and inspired by a vast and infinite and yet a minutely selective wisdom, Prajna Prasrita Purani of the Gita. Actually, it seems it is from the Shvetashvatara Upanishad, but the idea is the same.
It says Upanishad in my volume.
Yeah. The Shvetashvatara Upanishad. Okay. The words are slightly different in the Gita. Wisdom that went forth from the eternal since the beginning. That's the meaning of Prajna Prasrita Purani. For the particular utilities, we must cast a penetrative eye on the different methods of yoga and distinguish among their mass among the mass of their details, the governing idea which they serve, and the radical force which gives birth and energy to their processes of effectuation. Afterwards, we may more easily find the one common principle and the one common power from which all derive their being and tendency, towards which all subconsciously move, and in which, therefore, it is possible for all consciously to unite. Okay, so I like to do one thing. I like to go into each word, because even though each word is pregnant with meaning, so that we have to bring that out so that you. And also, when he is giving a phrase, his phrase is not saying it could easily be replaced by one word, but it is so descriptive that it gives you extra information. That's why it's worth going into this. Okay. I read the first sentence. We recognize then in the past developments of yoga. Note the phrase, in the past developments of yoga. I am now going to come to the present development of yoga. Implication. Okay. A specializing and separative tendency, which, like all things in nature, again he is seeing the thing in nature and applying it to yoga. Okay.
And capitalizing nature.
Yeah. Which means universal nature. When he uses capital N, he means universal nature. And when you use a lowercase, it can apply to the individual. Had its justifying and even imperative utility, and we seek and we, whenever Sridhar uses the word we, it's a royal we. He doesn't say I, okay, or doesn't say the integral yoga. He just says we. Okay, and we seek a synthesis of the specialized aims and methods which have, in consequence, come into being. Okay, so he is saying that there are many yogas. He will discuss each of them later on, but basically here in the synthesis he discusses first Hatha Yoga based on the body. Then he discusses the Bhakti Yoga based on the emotions, and the Jnana Yoga based on the mind. But also he discusses the what is the main one?
Raj Yoga.
Raj Yoga. Raj Yoga is the one. Okay. So Raj Yoga he discusses also. And Raj Yoga is a sort of Jnana Yoga only. But he discusses that also. Then he also discusses Tantra. Okay. And then he, as I told you, he'll try and find a common principle to all of them and apply it in modern times. In ancient times, if you had to do Raj Yoga, sit 2 hours in the morning meditation, 2 hours in the evening meditation. Now in modern life, when can you do that? You can't do that. So you have to find a method where yoga is practicable in life, during your working hours, during your normal traveling hours, everything. You should be able to do it. Okay. So he wants a synthesis of the specialized aims and methods. As I told you, some concentrate on the body, some concentrate on the emotions, some concentrate on the mind, but he wants each of these yogas will recognize one aspect of the divine. But that one aspect is so satisfying that they get stuck in it. It is so satisfying. But Sridhar is not satisfied. It's very difficult to satisfy. He wants all. He wants to know the divine fully. Okay. That famous quote from Mother's New Year message is there, where she says that if you want to know the divine fully, you must be conscious of the whole universe at the same time. In one of her New Year messages, I think 1958.
I think so.
It's 73.
73.
Oh, sorry, 73?
Yes, 73.
Oh, yes, it's the last one, yeah. Last one. So, let's see, you have to understand the divine fully. Otherwise, you have only one aspect of him.
Each part in us desires its absolute.
That is Savitri.
Yeah, but that's also there.
True.
Okay, we go to the next sentence. But in order that we may be wisely guided in our effort, we must know first the general principle and purpose underlying this separative impulse, and next the particular utilities upon which the method of each school of yoga is founded. So he wants two things. He wants to know the principle which is common to all of them. Okay? And he is also saying we must understand why it was necessary to separate yoga in general into so many categories. Okay? Separative tendency, we must be able to know and understand the purpose underlying the separative impulse. To do the integral yoga is not easy, but much easier to concentrate on any one part of the body. Therefore, in the ancient days, they took the easy path. They took either the body or the emotions or the mind. Okay. Even the Raj Yoga is a most commonly practiced in India, but still, that also is a sort of Jnana Yoga only. There is a very, very systematic, methodized process by which you do it, but it is mainly you start from the mind. Okay. So, we must understand, he is saying the general principle and also the particular utilities. Each one, what are the instruments they are using and what is the purpose of each one, upon which the method of each school of yoga is founded. For the general principle, we must interrogate the universal workings of nature herself. Let us see what the nature, how she is developing herself. That's why the chapter heading, the 3 steps of nature. So he said, let's examine that. There is matter, then after that comes out life, and after that comes out mind. So these are the 3 steps of nature. He puts it in different words. He is saying, what has been evolved, what is evolving now, and what is to be evolved. That's the 3 steps of nature. He is putting it that way. Okay, so for the general principle, we must interrogate the universal workings of nature herself, recognizing in her no merely specious and elusive activity of a distorting Maya, but the cosmic energy and working of God Himself in His universal being, formulating and inspired by vast, infinite, and yet a minutely selective wisdom, Prajna Prasrita Purani of the Gita. Okay, now he is saying that we will look at nature, but we will not look at nature as the traditionalists are doing. We will not look at nature as Maya. We will not look at it as illusion. We will take it as a divine manifestation, which is real. Okay?
It's a very important sentence.
Yeah, that's right. He says we should not look at it as Maya. There is a truth of Maya, but behind that truth is a greater truth. The divine presence is there behind every form. Okay, so then he says we look at that. Okay, so specious. The word specious means convincing at present. How do you pronounce it?
Specious.
Specious.
Yes.
Yeah.
Comes from speech.
That which is apparently convincing in the beginning, but turns out to be not so true in the end.
Like precious, specious?
No.
Convincing at first sight, plausibly deceptive. Okay, that's the meaning of specious. So, when you have the spiritual experience, you see the physical world really as unreal. But there is a higher consciousness which sees again there is a reality behind that illusion.
We have a person speaking and seeming to be speaking the truth, and yet it's false.
Yeah, that's right.
That's specious.
Yeah.
Showy.
Apparently convincing, but finally not so. So, wisdom, he is translating, Prajna is wisdom. By the way, just one small detail, in Sanskrit you pronounce ja. Okay? In our Indian language we say prajna. But because it's a ja, not a ga. So, this we were taught by Vedalankar, Jagannath ji. He was a Vedalankar and he was an expert in Sanskrit. He told us that this is pronounced prajna.
Shyamananda also uses an alternative spelling for jnana, where he doesn't put that tilde over the N. It's simply Jnana. So,
very clear, yeah, jnana. So, prajna, prasrita, Purani of ancient times. Prasrita, which oozed out. So, the wisdom, the one wisdom which oozed out and created the multiplicity of the universe.
Sorry, you're reading Gita second time in this. Is it Gita in your version?
I have, yes.
It's Gita? I mean,
No,
The
Upanishad.
I have Upanishad as well as the Gita.
no.
What are you saying?
The text of the synthesis which you read, Prajna Prasthita Purani. So in my version, it is Prajna Prasthita Purani of the Upanishad. But
Yes.
twice you read of the Gita.
Sri Aurobindo has written of the Gita. That is why editorially they corrected it.
Really?
Yeah. It's true because he is giving you the meaning. Okay. So he is giving you the meaning. In the Gita, there are slightly different words. Okay. Tameva chadyam purusham prapadye yata pravritti prasrita purani. In the Gita, it is that. So, Sri Aurobindo has used the word prajna. Okay?
But I have seen in Savitri many changes also. That may not be quite.
Mostly capitalization, because Sri Aurobindo was not so particular. And you must remember one thing. Towards the end, Sri Aurobindo was not writing directly. He was translating. He was dictating.
He was dictating.
And there was Narad who was writing down. And Narad is to often pronounce English in a Bengali accent. Okay, a little bit. Now, if Sri Aurobindo says soul, what are you going to write? S-O-L-E? Or are you going to write S-O-U-L? So these small errors have crept in there. And when you are pronouncing the past tense also, the D is often not pronounced clearly in English. No?
True.
But this is only for Savitri, right? Not for other books.
No. Other books he wrote, no?
Like Hymns to the Mystic Fire also, I've heard that he dictated to Purani before it came out in 46.
I'm not sure of that. I'm not sure. I doubt that a little bit.
No, it's there in the note on the texts.
There is?
Yes.
Okay. So, see, Sri Aurobindo is saying we will not look at nature as though she is deceiving you, as though it's a falsehood. We will see as though it's a divine manifestation. You can see it as an illusion, but behind the illusion there is a greater reality. We'll look at it that way, he's saying. Okay? So, for the particular utilities, we must cast a penetrative eye on the different methods of yoga and distinguish among the mass of their details the governing idea which they serve and the radical force which gives them birth and energy to their processes of effectuation. Note the words governing idea and radical force. Governing idea, consciousness. Radical force, Shakti. He is again implying Purusha Prakriti. Will combine the two. Okay? We won't go like some of the, most of the traditional yogas go to only Purusha aspect, consciousness aspect. Tantra is the only one which goes daringly to the opposite. It goes to Prakriti first. Okay? So Sri Aurobindo is saying we'll combine both.
So like knowledge and will. Like knowledge and will.
Will is, I can't see you. Knowledge and will, yes, that's right. Knowledge, more or less equivalent to consciousness. It's consciousness that produces knowledge, not force. And force produces the energy and the effectuation. If you want to effectuate your knowledge, now that's interesting, we'll just discuss that for a brief while. If you want to effectuate your knowledge, you can do that by ascending out of your body-mind life and getting the know. The soul will come to know the body-mind life. Are you being able to effect that knowledge in life? No. So you need power. Liberation usually releases your soul, but the body-mind life remains imperfect. So you have to use that, the power to bring down all that knowledge, power, love, truth into the lower. And that's a pulling down to the lowest level. That's difficult, not easy.
Sri Aurobindo says we shouldn't pull.
Not pull, aspire from below. But he did pull.
He did pull, no doubt, no doubt.
He pulled violently the supermind down into the... I'm using the word violent, but he is a calm violence.
He went into Narad, I call the tail of Superman.
That's right. He is joking even about the supermind.
Exactly.
Okay, so for the you raise a question of will and force. Force is more general. Will is force applied to a particular object. So they are equivalent, just like knowledge and consciousness. Consciousness is much larger. Knowledge is one aspect of consciousness. Okay. For the particular utilities, we must cast a penetrative eye on the different methods of yoga and distinguish among the mass of their details the governing idea which they serve and the radical force which gives them birth and energy to their processes of effectuation. The traditional yogas are not so much interested in effectuating the knowledge and the power and the love and the truth into their body-mind life. They are not interested. The soul is free, that's enough. Okay. Things are changing, but quite radically now.
Rather quickly.
Yes. Afterwards, we may more easily find the one common principle and the one common power from which all derive their being and tendency, towards which all subconsciously move, and in which, therefore, it is possible for all consciously to unite. Okay. Again, in the last sentence, the phrase, it is possible for all consciously to unite. The suggestion is a collective life, not an individual life alone. That's the reason why the ashram has been created in our will. Okay. It has to be a sufficiently collective force. If one person is pulling in one direction, it will not have enough force. So if 10 people are concentrating on the same object, the power increases and it comes down. That's why he wants a collectivity. Okay.
But something very important
Yes.
that Mother said. She was speaking of 50,000 people to make this experiment.
That's right.
Not the 3,000 who
Yeah.
are there now. 50,000.
And that had to be done. Because when Sri Aurobindo came to Pondicherry, he was looking for 100 men who would be capable of assisting in his work. He didn't find anybody. They all, mind you, don't mistake this. So many ashramites, okay, they have had so many experiences, okay, which will be fantastic. In one letter he says that my sadhaks, they may have realized one aspect of the divine, but if they had gone out into the world, they'll become famous. So many experiences they have had. But he wants all the experiences.
Champaklal, she wrote one of the 100.
Yes.
But Champaklal, I think Mother said one of the 100. Somewhere it is there.
Yeah, one of the 100 or something else.
No,
But
as
yeah,
far
one
as
of,
well, it is there.
One of the 100, yeah.
yeah.
But also, Nalini even
No doubt.
would go out
Yes.
and he would have a child, and then he'd go out again and have a child.
Yeah, three.
And the fourth time, or the third or fourth time he went out, Sri Aurobindo said, finally.
Enough.
He had 3 children.
3 children, yes.
3.
In one letter to somebody, Sri Aurobindo speaks about Narad, who's one of the
The greatest.
greatest of yogis. He says that now Nalini is in the football and marriage mood.
Oh, he says that.
So, that doesn't mean to say that he is not a yogi. Because precisely you can be in the physical world, play football, and get married and have children. Note interestingly how, okay, Buddha had children, okay, Rama, Krishna, all of the avatars, they all had children.
Mother also had a child.
Yes, don't forget that. So this last phrase you have to see, it's not so easy to get the implication. Therefore, in which therefore it is possible for all consciously to unite. So Aurobindo is not talking of an individual yoga, he is talking of a collective yoga. Okay, it's an important phrase. But Sri Aurobindo throws out only hints. You have to see what is there behind the hint and understand what he is saying. We go to the next para.
Yes.
The progressive self-manifestation of nature in man, termed in modern language his evolution, must necessarily depend upon 3 successive elements. That which is already evolved, that which is persistently in the stage of conscious evolution, and that which is to be evolved, and may perhaps be already displayed, if not constantly, then occasionally, or with some regularity of recurrence in primary formations or in others more developed, and it may well be, even in some, however rare, that are near to the highest possible realization of our present humanity. For the march of nature is not drilled to a regular and mechanical forward stepping. She reaches constantly beyond herself, even at the cost of subsequent deplorable retreats. She has rushes, she has splendid and mighty outbursts, she has immense realizations. She storms sometimes passionately forward, hoping to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. And he is referring to specific things. And these self-exceedings are the revelation of that in her which is most divine, or else most diabolical. Okay? But in either case, the most puissant to bring her rapidly forward towards her goal. Okay? So, here he is speaking of the 3 steps of nature: that which has already evolved, that which is evolving, and that which is to be evolved.
I have quite different wording.
Yeah?
Yes.
You also, huh?
Yes.
Yeah.
Using the SAPC.
Why don't you read the whole thing?
There is that which is already evolved. There is that which, still imperfect, still partly fluid, is persistently in the stage of conscious evolution.
Yes.
Ah.
Now, which edition is yours?
Huh?
Yours is which edition?
Oh, this is SAPCL. So, let's look at the phrases. Okay. Now, the progressive self-manifestation of nature in man. Now, what is the self-manifestation of nature in man? We will see later on. So, self-manifestation of nature. Nature has evolved. First of all, there was matter. There was no life for thousands and millions of years. Then life came out of it. Then maybe another million years, and man appeared on the scene. In fact, now they say if you take the entire evolution from 0 point to 100, okay, man has come only at 90, almost 99, 95. Yeah. So the rest of it was what all? Nature was first of all manifesting matter, then life, and mind came later on. Okay, so that which is evolved is the body-mind life. That which is evolving is the mind still developing. This is interesting because mental consciousness in normal human beings is completely vitiated and made impure by the vital and the body needs. They throw their desires and their wants and needs into the mind, and the mind gets completely colored. So, those who can keep their mind absolutely clear, that's what he's talking about later on, it is still developing, it is not yet developed. 90% of human beings are not mental beings. They are more physical, vital, mental beings.
Yeah, the question was asked, Mother, when those 70,000 people died in the earthquake in Peru. The child said, Mother, didn't any of them have a psychic being that was aware? Mother said, very few are aware of their psychic being. Wow.
So, even the most intellectually developed people, okay, their vital does play a role. And of course, the body plays a role for everybody. You are subject to food and sleep. You have to do that. Okay. I don't even speak about sex, but these are all things which everybody gets affected by.
Also, process of elimination.
Yeah.
All of these
That's
things.
Right. So, now what Srimdev is saying is interesting. He is using, look at that, the words he uses. The progressive self-manifestation of nature in man. So, in man, nature has manifested a body corresponding to matter. It has manifested a vital being which corresponds to prana in the universal level. And it has manifested a mind in men which corresponds to the universal plane of the mental consciousness, where thoughts are there. These are all worlds which exist independent of each other, although they do percolate into each other, but they are still independent. There is a physical plane which is independent of life. Stones are there without life. Then there is life, which is a combination of matter and prana. All living creatures are a combination of matter and prana. And finally you have man, which is a combination of all the three planes of consciousness. So, self-manifestation of nature in man, termed in modern language, is evolution. So why is he saying this? Why is he taking the trouble of putting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 words? Termed in modern language is evolution. Because earlier the concept of evolution was not there.
And he says modern language.
Yeah.
Yes.
In modern times, the idea of evolution has come up. Not at an individual level so much, but science has discovered the universal level. It has discovered Charles Darwin was the first to formulate the idea. But his idea of evolution is biological, not consciousness. Okay? But Srinath is using the word evolution for consciousness and using the biological evolution as a support. You can't have a spiritual evolution without the parallel development of the biological evolution also. It's very clear, because you see, take an insect. It doesn't have a brain. It can't think. It's living. So when you come to a cat and a dog, rudiments of thinking are coming, but not logic. So you need a biological development of the brain, which is matter with life in it, which is capable of thought. So you need a biological evolution. In other words, even the supramental race will have a body-mind life which will be biologically quite different. It has to be. Okay.
One question. Sorry, when you speak about evolution here and all this, so in the Indian tradition, so in the Vishnu Purana it is there, in the Taittiriya Upanishad it is there, but also they speak of this 84 lakh species. Where is that? Is it in the Tantra? I mean, do you know about it?
No, I'm not sure. 84 lakh, Tantra mentions that to come to this level you have to have 1 lakh of lives. Yeah.
1 lakh.
They mention 1 lakh in some texts. So, this evolution must necessarily depend upon 3 successive elements. That we have a slightly different text, but the idea is the same. The first is that which is already evolved. That which is already evolved is matter and life, living creatures, solidly evolved. Different species are coming up, but they are combination of matter and life. Then, that which is evolving, he's saying, that which is persistently in the stage of conscious evolution is the mental development. And that which is to be evolved and may perhaps be already displayed, that which is to be evolved is the yogi consciousness. So, you have a physical vital consciousness, you have a mental consciousness which is still evolving. Everybody is not mental yet. And there is a yogic consciousness which has to be developed largely and commonly in mankind. It is not yet there. But he is giving interesting parenthetical phrases. Okay, so that which is to be evolved and may perhaps be already displayed, if not constantly, then occasionally or with some regularity of recurrence in primary formations or in others, developed, and it may well be, even in some, however rare, that are near to the highest possible realization of our present humanity.
We need you to talk about that.
Obviously, he can't include himself, but he's very obviously he is the highest and rarest. But he is also referring to the Vedic period. The Vedic period, they had the experience of the supermind. In fact, he has found the first words there. Yes.
But the difference is they could not bring it here. They had experience, but it was not on earth.
What you are saying is very interesting, because the idea of evolution was there in seed form in India, the Dashavatar. But it wasn't the practical truth. It wasn't the practical truth, yeah.
And in that the mother speaks about that new body of the new race. She was saying the body would make out of psychic being.
Yes.
She was having the experiences of that.
She saw, I can even tell you who it was because now she's not there. Okay, it was Rijuta. She was an American lady, and she had gone to Mother and she was bowing down in front of her. And behind her physical body, Mother saw her psychic being larger than the body. And she said that probably this will be the future body. It will be a spiritual body.
Rajuta was assigned to all the Americans, and we all had to go through her for things in the early days.
You knew Rijuta well? She used to live where I live now, in the next door house. Her husband was tremendously in love with her, and he built that house for her, okay? But she didn't want to leave the house.
She stayed in Golkon, no? She lived in Golkon.
She used to, but then when he built this house, and he did it with his own hands and all, a very interesting character, okay? He wasn't very well educated, but he was an expert in air conditioning.
Oh.
Okay. In fact, one day there's an interesting side story. Sometimes I go into a little bit of to enliven the whole proceedings. Okay?
And we welcome it.
So he was having a chat with Udar. Okay, what was his name? I forget his name. Rishita's husband. Anyway, now so he was not very well educated, but he was an expert in air conditioning. Voltas of India was employing him. Okay, so he wrote something, and Udar found that the spelling was wrong. So he said, "What have you done? You have misspelled that 5-letter word." He said, "What do you mean?" He got angry. "I misspell even 3-letter words." So that was Rijuta, and Mother had the experience of a psychic being behind, larger than the body. Usually the psychic being is spoken of as a tiny little flame.
No larger than the
No
thumb
larger
of
than
man.
the thumb of a man.
The explanation of that will come in the book.
Huh?
The explanation of what that means will come in synthesis.
Yeah. Now he says that this yogic consciousness which has to be developed is already developed in many, sometimes rare, sometimes quite recurringly, as in the Indian traditions. In India, for 10,000 years, the yoga has always been alive. Okay? There was no internet, no newspapers in those days, so we don't know much about it. But there is definitely a parampara, there is a tradition of yogis who are going on realizing. That is definitely there. That's why Surendra uses the word recurrence. You have seen that?
Yes, yes. Regularity
of recurrence. Okay? So, all right. So, in primary formation means not absolutely at the highest levels, but the primary formations begin at the higher mind level. The moment you go above, those are the primary formations. Okay? Or you can have love, or you can have the aspect of knowledge, but those are the primary, not the entire thing. Okay? So, or in others, more developed, and it may well be, even in some, however rare, that are near to the highest possible realization of our present humanity. Note that. It's interesting again. Don't miss that word. He says, that are near to the highest possible realization of our present humanity. In other words, when the supermental race comes, the possibilities will change even higher. That's the implication.
Oh, present humanity.
Yes.
Yes.
Don't miss the word present. I am pointing this out to you to show you how accurate Surendra is in his words. Okay? Yeah. Now, he goes on to the next sentence. For the march of nature is now drilled to a regular and mechanical forward stepping. She reaches constantly beyond herself, even at the cost of subsequent deplorable retreats. You have another text?
Same, with
Same.
a full stop after
Okay.
retreats.
So, obviously he is referring to the Vedic period. The Vedic period, there was huge development. As I told you, even materially, okay? Economics, politics. Chanakya was for statehood. Arthashastra who wrote? Chanakya, okay. Then who's the other one who dealt with diplomacy?
Same.
Chanakya was politics, Kautilya was Arthashastra.
No, they are one and the same person, it seems.
Kautilya?
We're not sure.
Same.
We're not sure.
They both, the different names for same person, that's what they say.
So they are
So anyway, so Martha is not drilled to a regular and mechanical forward stepping. She reaches constantly beyond herself, even at the cost of subsequent deplorable retreats.
And what were the deplorable retreats when the Vedic age
okay.
ended?
What happened in India? Best example.
Yeah, okay.
Absolute degradation of life, poverty, neglect of the physical world, illiteracy, poverty, dirt. Okay, the best example is India itself. After that brilliant Vedic period, complete fall, to the extent that you have become subject to every invading force. The Mughals come and do whatever they want with you. The British come and do whatever they want with you. Okay.
It's like a rise of civilization and fall. But India survived, you see. There was a great civilization which is no more there.
Yes, that's right.
And India survived. Through all that fall, it survived.
What Luba is saying is very interesting because it is one of the civilizations which has it has retained the seed of yogic development secretly. Now they're saying it will come out openly. The sequence was never lost in India.
Sir, are we not undergoing a kind of deplorable retreat right now?
I wouldn't say that. There's a general awakening, na? There's a general awakening.
But we don't find the kind of yogis that we saw in the previous century.
How do you know?
No. That's
How do you
not
know?
romanticism with the past. Shabda very clearly said in the Bengali writings, in the Dharma, he says rishis are being born in India who are going to dim the luster on the,
I'm talking about the interim period.
My dear, there is always this nostalgia with the past because you don't see them.
What he's saying is interesting because it is true that the material aspect of life in India is rampant. Okay? Everywhere you see only people interested in TV and food and movies and whatnot. But the yogic tendency also is increasing. It is not that they are opposite to each other.
But they are not given publicity.
Exactly.
Exactly.
That's why I asked you, how do you know?
Things.
A yogi who has attained a certain consciousness is not going to broadcast, take a loudspeaker. Okay, so we don't know. But it is sure to evolve.
And regarding Shastras, so this is one very funny sentence in the Foundations of Indian Culture where he says, there was even a manual for the training of horses. I remember reading the sentence in the Foundations of Indian Culture.
That's what I'm saying.
So it was that detailed. No aspect of life was left out.
I don't even mention metallurgy. Metallurgy, the Arabians used to come with their horses because we never had horses we had lions and tigers. No giraffes and no horses in India. So they used to bring horses and our armies, they used to train the horses and they used to export swords which were in high demand in those countries. Metallurgy was highly developed in India. Okay, let me mention to you one thing. The word gold in Sanskrit, there are 8 words describing gold. Not one.
Anmol is not agreeing with you.
Regarding this horses thing, there are 2 types of species. One is having certain number of ribs and another is having 1 or 2 ribs lesser. So in Haryana recently they have done some digging in which they have found another species which is having the lesser ribs and they say that this is the Indian species of horse. And for that matter, in the Mahabharata war, for example, which is 5,000 years ago, all of them were not fighting on elephants and foot soldiers. They were these horsemen also. So I mean that's one part of history, very big part which has been distorted. That's what I have heard recently.
Could be. I
don't remember the place in Haryana where the digging has been done, but it has been done.
But definitely the Arabian horses were far better than the Indian ones.
I have a question regarding the text. She rushes forward and to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. What does that mean?
I'm coming to that.
We're coming.
He's coming. We have not yet come to that. Okay, so she reaches constantly beyond herself, even at the cost of subsequent deplorable retreats. You can compare nature's evolution to a volcano. Whoosh, suddenly, then silence for 2 minutes. Again it comes up. Different, like these were development of the material world today. Science has progressed tremendously. But what about spiritual life in Europe and the West? Almost zero. Almost. There are many people who are awakening. But in India, Great development of spirituality. Zero in life. Things are changing now, but still, that's what he's talking about. Deplorable retreat. Okay. I think he is specifically referring to the Vedic period and the subsequent period.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree, yes.
Deplorable retreat. She has rushes. She has splendid and mighty outbursts. She has immense realizations. She storms sometimes passionately forward, hoping to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. He is extremely clearly referring to Ramakrishna.
Yes.
Very clearly.
He used the same
But why
exact
violence?
phrase.
Why violence?
Because long ago in 1955 or 56 we saw the movies came to the ashram and mother was permitting us to see movies. We saw a movie called Rani Rashmani, which was a life of Ramakrishna. So I still remember the scene. I must have been 15 or 16 years old at that time, but it's stuck in my mind. He is rolling on the mud of the river, Hooghly. Okay?
Hooghly River.
Hooghly River, yeah. Ganges, one aspect of the Ganges is Hooghly. Okay. And he's saying, Dakha de ma, show yourself to me, show yourself. Such violence and so much.
I mean, his face was even bleeding from that.
Yeah. And finally, one day he took a sword in his hand and said, if you don't show yourself to me, I'm going to kill myself. So that's the violence that he's referring to.
And that's when she appears, right?
Yes, and she immediately appears to him. But Srimdo mentions in one letter that he had to pay a price for that. Violence. He says your aspiration should never be violent and demanding and vital. It should be calm, quiet, intense, but not violent.
Without impatience.
It caused him the body problem, right, afterwards.
Yes, there is a burning in his body. That's the price he paid for it. Okay, so that's what he's referring to here. She storms sometimes passionately forward. Immense realizations. Look at Ramakrishna's realizations. The realization of all the religions. There's a truth in all these things. Yeah, he's a giant, spiritual giant. There's no doubt about it. She storms sometimes passionately forward, hoping to take the kingdom of heaven by violence. And these self-exceedings are the revelation of that in her nature, which is most divine or else most diabolical. See, if you develop yourself beyond your present capacity, you have to do it in two ways. Either you do it calmly, quietly in a yogi consciousness, or it can be ego-based. If it is ego-based, it's going to be diabolical. Okay. Even Hitler used to have visions. Diabolical. There's another very interesting case of, I think, in Russia, Rasputin.
Oh, yes.
He was also similar.
I've read a lot about him. And my good friend Rene Philip Miller has written the book on him. A brilliant book.
And so he's saying, which is most divine or else diabolical, because you have developed yourself beyond a certain stage where you are not able to control the power you have. And the power controls you, you don't control the power. What has happened now in science? Okay, we have discovered nuclear energy and we don't know what to do with it. It's like holding a tiger by the tail. You can neither let it go, nor can you sit on the tiger. Very difficult.
That's why they use these Elon Musk's, Elon Musk's
Elon Musk.
machines for going to Mars. Probably that's where they're going to dump these nuclear things ultimately.
Poor master.
But in either case, the most puissant to bring her rapidly forward towards her goal. So you have to go to the higher levels of consciousness, because then her evolution will go rapidly forward. So you see, we have done only 2 paragraphs, but we have gone into great detail with the words. And you can see how Sri Aurobindo uses words, and so many suggestions are there in his words. So when you read Sri Aurobindo, very carefully, each word you have to read.
And please tell your friends and family about the programs. They're on regularly on our website, Mother and Sri Aurobindo. One word, Mother and Sri Aurobindo.
.in.
No, .in is our website, but Mother and Sri Aurobindo is our YouTube site.
I see.
And he's on YouTube.
That's called a channel actually. I'm saying it's called a channel on YouTube.
Okay. Thank you, Ranga.
Okay.
And namaste, everyone. Namaste.